The absolute silence that followed her final note still echoed through the auditorium when Clara realized she had recovered far more than just her voice. She had found her soul. The morning began like all others for the past 3 years, with the metallic screech of a cleaning cart rattling down the hallways of the Federal University of Music. Clara Mendez pushed the heavy equipment, her calloused hands gripping the broom handle with the same precision she once held a violin bow. At 42, she had become invisible to most who passed. Hurried students, professors immersed in their scores, administrative staff who barely looked up from their desks. She was just another janitor, another uniformed ghost who kept the spaces clean while the real musicians created art. The irony was cruel. Clara cleaned the very rooms where she had once been one of the conservatory's most promising students. Her fingerprints, now hardened by cleaning chemicals, once danced delicately across piano keys and violin strings. Her voice, which now only whispered instructions to her coworkers, once filled entire auditoriums with Puccini arias and Schubert chamber songs. But that was before. Before the accident that took her husband, before the depression that consumed her passion for music, before she discovered that the world didn't wait for dormant talents, it simply discarded them when they no longer served its purposes. While cleaning the glass of one of the rehearsal rooms, Clara observed a young violinist struggling with a particularly difficult passage from a Mendelssohn concerto. The girl, no older than 20, frowned in frustration, repeating the same section dozens of times without achieving the necessary fluidity. Clara knew that feeling. The music was there, perfect in her mind, but it got lost on the way between her heart and her fingers. "Impeccable technique, Clara," he had said, adjusting his glasses, "but I felt something was missing, a deeper connection, perhaps. The music must come from the soul, not just the fingers." At the time, she had taken the criticism to heart, spending hours trying to figure out what was missing in her performance. Now, with the wisdom that only pain could teach, she realized the problem had never been her music. It was the inability of some people to recognize the truth when it was right in front of them. Helena put away her violin, tears in her eyes, and Clara felt a fury rise in her chest. The young woman had talent. That was obvious to anyone who truly understood music. But she was being discouraged by the same system that had stifled so many other promising musicians. "Miss Andrade," Dr. Castillo said, gathering his scores, "I'll give you 2 weeks to show me a substantial improvement. Otherwise, I recommend you consider transferring to another course. Music is a jealous mistress. She doesn't accept those who can't fully surrender to her." Clara couldn't hold back any longer. Without thinking about the consequences, she opened the door to the room and entered, her janitor's uniform contrasting sharply with the sophisticated environment of the rehearsal room. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't help but overhear the conversation." Dr. Castillo turned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Excuse me, but this is a private conversation between professor and student. You may continue your cleaning now." "I'm not here to clean," Clara replied, lifting her chin. "I'm here because I know talent when I see it, and this young woman has something many musicians spend their whole lives searching for." Helena looked at Clara with surprise and gratitude, while Dr. Castillo frowned with a mixture of condescension and irritation. "Well, ma'am," he paused, clearly having no idea who she was. Clara Miller," she replied, and for a moment she saw a flicker of recognition in the professor's eyes. "And before you dismiss me as just a cleaning lady who doesn't understand music, let me remind you that I was once your student, 20 years ago." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with memories and possibilities. Dr. Castillo studied her more intently, and Clara saw the exact moment he recognized her, not just as the brilliant student she had been, but as the symbol of all the talent he had failed to nurture. "Clara Miller," he murmured, and there was something close to embarrassment in his voice. I remember you. You had potential." "I had more than potential," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "I had passion, talent, and dedication, but you and others like you made me believe that wasn't enough." Helena watched the exchange with wide eyes, sensing she was witnessing something important, though she didn't fully understand what was happening. "Clara," said Dr. Castillo, adopting a conciliatory tone, "you clearly went through hardships, and I regret that. But that doesn't change the fact that not everyone is born to be a professional musician. Sometimes life takes us down different paths." The condescension in his voice was like a match struck to the fuse of Clara's anger. She approached the piano in the corner of the room, her fingers lightly touching the keys. "You want to talk about passion?" she asked, her voice low but charged with emotion. "Let me show you what life does to passion when nobody's looking." And then, without further warning, Clara began to play. The opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room with a purity that made both Helena and Dr. Castillo stop breathing. But this wasn't a cold, technical interpretation. It was a confession, a prayer, a battle cry. Clara played as if her life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. As her hands danced across the keys, she felt 20 years of pain, frustration, and buried dreams. Each note carried the weight of sleepless nights cleaning offices to pay the bills, of condescending glances from people who saw her only as a cleaning lady, of a talent she had buried so deeply that she had almost forgotten it existed. The music grew in intensity, and Clara let herself be completely carried away. She wasn't in the rehearsal room anymore. She was in every place the music had taken her over the years. She was in the small apartment where she practiced piano on a silent keyboard so as not to disturb the neighbors. She was in the nights she sang to herself while cleaning, transforming monotonous work into a ritual of resistance. She was in the moments she listened to music through the doors of the rooms she cleaned, allowing herself to dream for a few seconds before returning to reality. The first movement of the sonata flowed into the second, and Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She wasn't just playing for Helena and Dr. Castillo. She was playing for the young girl she had been, for the woman she had become, for all the silenced talents stifled by a system that values conformity more than authenticity. Helena had moved closer to the piano, mesmerized by the performance. She had never seen anyone play with such vulnerability and power at the same time. It was as if Clara were tearing pieces of her soul and transforming them into music. Dr. Castillo remained motionless, his expression cycling through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, embarrassment, and something that could be described as shame. He was witnessing what happens when true talent is forced to hide, when passion is compressed until it becomes an explosive force. By the time Clara reached the third movement, her impeccable technique combined with the raw emotion created something transcendent. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was rewriting her own story, reclaiming her place in the world of music. Not as a former student who had failed, but as an artist who had never stopped being an artist, even when no one was paying attention. The final note of the sonata echoed through the air, and the silence that followed was unlike anything that had ever existed in that room. It was the silence of recognition, of revelation, of transformation. Clara rose from the piano, her hands trembling slightly, and turned to face her listeners. Helena had tears in her eyes, and Dr. Castillo looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "That," Clara said, her voice hoarse with emotion, "is what happens when you tell someone they don't have enough passion. You don't kill the passion, you force it to transform into something more powerful. You transform it into resilience." Helena stepped forward, her voice a respectful whisper. "I've never heard anyone play like that. How do you do it?" Clara smiled, and it was a smile that carried 2 decades of pain and wisdom. "You don't force the music out, dear. You stop preventing it from coming out. You stop worrying about what people will think and simply let the truth flow through you. Dr. Castillo finally found his voice, though it was significantly humbler than before. Clara, I didn't know. Your technique, your interpretation, it's extraordinary. How did you keep all this up all these years? I didn't keep it, Clara replied, wiping tears from her face. I buried it. I let people like you convince me I wasn't good enough, that something was missing in me. I spent 20 years cleaning the rooms where others made music because I thought I didn't deserve to be on the other side of the door. The realization of what had happened began to settle in the room. Helena looked at Clara with an admiration that went beyond professional respect. It was the recognition that she was in the presence of someone who had transformed suffering into art. "But you deserve it," Helena said, her voice filled with conviction. "You always deserved it." Clara turned to the young violinist, seeing in her eyes the same fire she herself had carried years ago. "And you deserve it too, Helena. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Your music is unique, it's yours, and that's all it needs to be." Dr. Castillo cleared his throat, clearly struggling with his own emotions. "Clara, I owe you an apology, not only to you, but to all the students I discouraged over the years. I lost sight of what truly matters in music." "It's not about you," Clara replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "It's about not letting this happen again. It's about recognizing that talent comes in many forms, and that our responsibility as teachers is to nurture, not judge." Helena picked up her violin again, and Clara could see a new determination in her eyes. Could you help me? I feel like there's so much I could learn from you." Clara hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of 20 years of self-doubt pressing against this new possibility. But then she looked at the young woman, saw the genuine hope in her eyes, and something shifted in her chest. "Do you want me to help you?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yes," Helena replied without hesitation. "I want to learn to play with truth like you did just now." Clara looked at Dr. Castillo, who nodded slowly. "I think we could all learn from that," he said, his voice filled with genuine humility. And then something extraordinary happened. Clara began to sing, not the elaborate arias she had studied decades ago, but a simple song, a melody she had created during her years of silence. It was a song about resilience, about finding beauty in unlikely places, about the strength that comes from being underestimated. Helena, inspired by Clara's vulnerability, began to play along, her strings finding natural harmonies with Clara's voice. It wasn't a planned performance, it was a musical conversation, a collaboration born of honesty and human connection. Dr. Castillo watched, and for the first time in years, he remembered why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfect technique or academic interpretations. It was about this magic that happened when people allowed themselves to be vulnerable through art. When the improvisation ended, the three remained silent for a moment, absorbing what had happened. Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. "I have a proposition," Dr. Castillo said, his voice hesitant but hopeful. "Clara, would you consider returning? Not as a student, but as a teacher. We have a piano instructor position that's open, and after what I just witnessed, I think you'd be perfect for it." Clara felt her heart race. The possibility of returning to music, not just as a secret passion, but as a career, as a purpose, was almost too much to contemplate. "I don't have the degrees you usually require," she said, her voice betraying her insecurity. "You have something far more valuable," Dr. Castillo replied. "You have the ability to transform pain into art, to find music where others see only silence. That's not something you learn in a classroom." Helena smiled, her eyes shining with excitement. "That would be amazing. Could you teach me that technique of letting the music flow naturally?" Clara looked around the room, the piano where she had just rediscovered her voice, the young violinist whose eyes shine with new hope, the professor who was clearly reevaluating his own beliefs about music and teaching.
And for the first time in 2 decades, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her music wasn't just a memory, but a living reality. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and clear, "I accept." And in that moment, something shifted not only for Clara, but for everyone in the room. Helena felt a new confidence in her own ability to find her authentic musical voice.
Castillo began to question decades of teaching methods that valued conformity over individuality. And Clara, for the first time since she could remember, felt she was exactly where she should be. In the months that followed, Clara's classroom became a place of transformation. She didn't just teach technique, she taught courage, authenticity, the art of transforming life experiences into musical expression. Her students learned that music wasn't about perfection, but about truth. Not about impressing others, but about connecting with something larger than themselves. Helena flourished under Clara's guidance, developing a unique style that combined solid technique with an emotional expressiveness that left audiences silent. She learned that music wasn't a conquest to be achieved, but an ongoing conversation between the artist and their soul. Dr. Castillo began to reassess his teaching methods, recognizing that his responsibility wasn't to mold students according to a preconceived ideal, but to help them discover and nurture their own unique artistic voices. He began collaborating with Clara, learning as much as he taught. For Clara, each day brought a new opportunity to reconnect with the passion that had defined her youth. She discovered that the years of silence hadn't destroyed her music, they had deepened it, giving it a richness and authenticity that only comes through lived experience. And if you're reading this story and feeling like there's something inside you that's been silenced, something you believe you've lost or never had the courage to fully explore, let me tell you, your voice is still there, waiting to be discovered. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. Because I believe we all have stories of rebirth to tell, and maybe your journey of rediscovery is the next one that needs to be shared with the world. Clara's first recital as a teacher was scheduled for a spring evening. She had chosen a program that included not only classical pieces, but also her own compositions. Songs she had written during the years of silence, melodies that carried her journey of loss and rediscovery. When she sat down at the piano that night, looking out at an audience that included colleagues, students, and members of the community, Clara felt a peace that had eluded her for decades. It wasn't just that she was playing again, it was that she was allowing her true voice to be heard, without apology, without fear of judgment. Her hand struck the first notes of her original composition, Resurrection, and the audience was immediately captivated. The music spoke of second chances, of talents that bloom at unexpected moments, of the courage it takes to reclaim our authenticity in a world that often encourages us to conform. As she played, Clara thought of all the janitors, waiters, drivers, and people in ordinary jobs who carried extraordinary talents in their hearts. She thought of how many potential artists were mopping floors, serving tables, driving cabs, while their souls cried out to be expressed through art. The music swelled in intensity, and Clara felt she was playing not only for her audience, but for all those who had been silenced, underestimated, or who had silenced themselves. Her performance became a statement. It's never too late to reclaim who you truly are. When the final note resonated through the auditorium, the silence that followed was profound and respectful. And then, starting with Helen in the front row, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But for Clara, the most significant applause came from within. It was the sound of her own soul finally being heard. After the recital, as Clara greeted the audience, an elderly woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I used to paint when I was young, but I stopped when everyone told me it wasn't practical. After hearing your music tonight, I think I'll buy some paints again." Clara smiled, holding the woman's hands in hers. "It's never too late to come home," she said. And it was true. Clara had learned that talent isn't something that's lost, it's something that's rediscovered. Passion doesn't die, it simply waits patiently until we have the courage to embrace it again. That night, as Clara walked through the halls of the university, no longer as an invisible janitor, but as a respected teacher and recognized artist, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every tear shed, every buried dream, every silent night had contributed to the depth of her current music. She stopped before the room where she had worked as a janitor, where she had cleaned windows while watching others make music. Now she saw the space with new eyes, not as a symbol of lost dreams, but as a reminder that true art springs from the full human experience, including its most difficult parts. The absolute silence that followed her last note still echoed in the auditorium, as Clara realized she had recovered far more than just her voice. She had found her soul. And in doing so, she had given permission for others to find theirs too. Music, Clara discovered, wasn't just about notes and rhythms. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, to transform pain into beauty, to refuse to accept silence when your soul had something to say. It was about recognizing that each person carries a unique melody, and that the world becomes richer when we allow those melodies to be heard. As she walked home that night, Clara hummed softly to herself, not the complex song she had performed, but something simple and free. It was the sound of someone who had found their way back home, the sound of a soul that had refused to accept silence as its final sentence. And in her voice, at that moment, there was the promise that it's never too late to begin again, never too late to rediscover who you truly are, and never too late to let your unique light shine in the world. Music, after all, isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity, and authenticity, Clara had learned, is the purest form of courage there is.